everybody. Thanks for making time for yet another episode of GreyhoundTV ONTrigger. This time we have a very interesting guest for you. Actually, we have interesting guests on each episode for you. But the reason this episode is interesting is because we've got somebody with extreme contrasts. He's somebody who started his career from the city of Bombay, now of course known as Mumbai, and also the home for Bollywood, which I'm sure which means that he enjoys a song and dance every now and then, loves his movies. So we'll sort of figure that out as we go. But now he lives in a very interesting city called Frisco, Texas, which has just been rated in the top 10 cities, the happiest cities in the US. So let's see how happy he will be with the tough questions that I throw at him. But it's also a city which is the home to Dallas Cowboys. So we'll sort of quiz him a little bit on Cowboys if he likes. Otherwise, I'll continue throwing my curveballs at him. So nonetheless, it's my pleasure to host Mr. Anant Adya, who leads the cloud business for Infosys. Anant, welcome to GreyhoundTV ONTrigger.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sanchit. And I was really looking forward to this. In fact, at Infosys, I call you as a celebrity. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to be interviewed by you. So thank you for that.
I am super humbled, and I will quickly make this about you and not about me. So, Anant, you've had a very illustrious career, I would say. And we'll talk about your Infosys career in a bit. But more importantly, you as a professional, talk to me about your as somebody who sort of spent 20 odd years in the infrastructure business. How's been your journey? Where did you start from? And give me the genesis of who Anant is.
Sure. In fact, I started with, this was way back in 1995, where there was a huge craze for software engineering, and, everybody wanted to do software. But I chose a relatively different field, which was hardware. And I started my journey with Patni Computers, which was not the software side of Patni, but the hardware side of Patni, right? Where Mr. Ashok Patni, I still consider him my first mentor. He was the one who was running this company. And, we used to have data general machines, MV8000s, and, these were the mini computers, so-called mini computers. So that's where I started my journey. So hardware is something that I was naturally excited about, and, it's something interested me right from the first day of my job. So I think I have been following I would say, something that I love to do right from day one. So that way I've been very lucky. And that's where I started my journey.
Very interesting. Tell me, so what inspires Anant? Let's say when he's listening to his favorite music, or let's say he's watching his favorite Bollywood film, or let's say he's watching a game of the Dallas Cowboys versus Texas, or whosoever. What really inspires Anant? Let's say when he sort of sits on his own, does he draw parallels to a game? Does he draw parallels to a movie or a song? Talk to me about that.
So I think one thing that I really, and this is probably typically of all the Bombay suburb boys who come from Bombay, I like to keep things very simple.
Right.
If I am watching a movie and the movie gets very stressful, I just switch it off and go. I don't want stress when I'm doing stuff, right? I like to keep it very, very simple. In fact, I was talking to one of my colleagues just now, and when we go to even go out for dinners or lunch and we want to eat food at some fancy restaurant, I order, simple dal roti, right? So I think that's how I keep things simple. So I would say even my style of working and my leadership style has been all about keep things simple, which can relate to the way customers think about problems. Don't over-engineer them, and don't use a lot of jargons when it comes to driving value. But ultimately, it means keeping it simple. So I would say, I think that's how I look at it. That's why, I listen to peppy music and to music from all genres, and I watch mindless action and comedy movies where there is nothing to learn, right? I mean, I keep myself away from serious stuff. That is on the personal side of mine.
That is a beautiful thought. In fact, I was going through your LinkedIn profile and I was seeing the recommendations that have been offered to you. And I think that sort of, echoes very well. And sort of one of the lines I remember from your recommendations was, he's somebody who really keeps the temperament very cool within the team. So kudos to you. So, but, you've been at Infosys for about 15 odd years, Anant. And, within these 15 years, Infosys has gone through many cycles. In fact, I would say that you've lived through multiple Infosys and not just one. So give us a flavor, what's been the journey like? And in your personal eyes, what's the evolution of Infosys as a company, both from a service offering perspective, and more importantly, I would say from a cultural nuance?
Well, absolutely. I think, in fact, it's very timely because coincidentally we are celebrating 4 decades of Infosys today. And all our co-founders are in the campus, and we have been talking about their journey and how they started Infosys 40 years back. And we have evolved as a company, right? In fact, one of the biggest things that I have learned through my 15 years at Infosys, this is my 15th year, by the way, and we believe in one thing, right? I mean, we keep making sure that we learn every time, and it's like Mr. Narayana Murthy, our founder, always used to say, and he continues to say, that lifelong learning is extremely critical for all of us. So we have evolved as a company, and we have learned a lot, right? I mean, not just with respect to how we conduct business, but also with respect to what's happening in the market. So I still remember when I joined in 2008 timeframe, and those days, we didn't have IoT, metaverse, 5G, cloud, and automation and AI.
Right.
And the simplest thing that we used to go and talk to our customers is how to convert time and material contracts to managed services, fixed price contracts, right? Where you don't have to worry about the resource, and we'll own the deliverables, we'll own the SLAs, and we'll deliver what you want us to do, right? From there to talking about business outcomes, it's a very, very big evolution. And
quite a journey, right?
It's a huge journey. And we have learned, and we continue to learn. In fact, once upon a time, we used to have these, tell us your experience of driving an Oracle implementation or an SAP implementation, and we will get 15-year experience, 20-year experience resources. And we'll talk about what we did 10 years back or 15 years back. But these days, the technology is changing so fast that, we have to learn continuously. So I would say that has been our culture, right? I mean, I would say our culture has been based on lifelong learning, which actually helps us to conduct business, even when things are changing in the technology world, right? So I would say that has been my biggest learning.
Interesting. But, Anant, to not sound negative, but to sound pragmatic, the fact is that when industries go through such waves of evolution, there's always this old wine and new bottle scenario. And I think this is not an accusation towards Infosys. I think it's an industry-wide thing, right? Everybody sort of goes through that. But, from your eyes, since you work with such a length and breadth of clients across the world, I'm sure you're sort of surprised by the extremes within IT organizations, right? While I'm sure there are great things like metaverse and IoT and 5G, which we'll talk about, but at the same time, I'm sure you must be seeing situations where you must be going, wow, the same age-old mistakes, and stuff hasn't changed in infrastructure. Tell me the polarities that you see in client situations.
Well, yeah, so we deal with 3 types of customers, right? I mean, if you look at traditionally, our focus was always on the G2Ks, as we call, right? The Global 2000s.
Yeah.
Who have grown through acquisitions, through mergers, and who have a lot of legacy technology debt, mainframes, and AS400s, and all of that. So that's one category of our customers. Second is the small and medium business who are sort of wanting to become the unicorns and wanting to become the big billion-dollar companies. And the third is this born in the cloud companies, right? Who are the companies who actually are the sort of the FANG companies, as we call, right? So each of these customers have different characteristics, right? For example, when we are talking to a FANG type of a company, they do not even want to talk about ERPs, or they don't want to talk about data centers or infrastructure. They want everything to be on the cloud. Whereas, the global 2000s want to bring a mix of both because they know that there is legacy technology that will continue to be there. Take, for example, mainframe. I mean, I still remember in 1995, when I started my career, there used to be this saying that, mainframes are going to die. So move towards Unix. So I started getting certified on SCO Unix and Novell NetWare. And fast forward, I mean, I'm talking about 1995 to 2022, which is 27 years. There are still customers who are using 100,000 MIPS and 170,000 MIPS of mainframe, right? So I think, those are also type of customers that we need to cater to. So I would say that, essentially one size doesn't fit all. That is one thing that we firmly believe. But we bring in experiences from different customers and try to educate customers in terms of, how they need to do things. So I would say that, we have been fairly successful. In fact, we have been successful on the G2K side. We have been successful on the born in the cloud side, on the small and medium business side. And the reason why we are very successful is because we understand the unstated and the unmet objectives of these customers. Right? I steal this from Satya Nadella, where he had made this statement that you should not just focus on the unmet objectives of the customer, but also the unstated objectives of the customer. So as long as you cater to both unmet and unstated, I think we will surely be successful with all three sectors of our customers, right, as I called out.
But Anant, in the new age, there is nothing called stealing. It's all inspiration from every source.
Yes, absolutely.
So good. So look, I understand that the amount of spectrum of choices that customers have today, especially in the era of the cloud, we started from a complete private cloud to a complete public and now to a hybrid multi-environment. But, the kind of clients I work with, these G2Ks, or you call it, they have been sort of meeting with a ton of complexity, be it in terms of outages or architectural issues or, cloud shocker builds. So there's a lot happening there from a client perspective. Now, from an Infosys perspective, talk to me about how are you sort of ensuring and easing out pain for these G2K customers specifically, who aren't so well versed with cloud, definitely want to try and are moving aggressively, but how are you ensuring you sort of purpose build a cloud for them and sort of, giving them enterprise grade quality?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, when we say cloud, right, our definition of cloud is, again, getting inspiration from what you say in the market is hybrid cloud, right? So everything from edge to core to public is what we define as cloud. One of the biggest, I think, if you look at the lowest common denominator when it comes to taking a cloud decision is variable versus non-variable workloads, right? I mean, that's how we used to talk when we started selling cloud in the market or going and talking to customers about cloud. So all your fixed workloads that do not change, that do not have business cycles, let them continue to remain on-prem in a private cloud. And anything that changes and has business cycles, like, the retailers and the e-commerce guys, let it go to cloud, right? So you can have the variability. So that's how we started our conversation. Going back to those whole system of record, to system of engagement, to system of innovation, we used to call that 4-layered approach. So these days, customers have become much more smarter, right? In fact, post-pandemic, one of the trends that we are seeing in the market is customers are first asking a basic question as to why do we even want to leverage cloud, right? I think let's define that first. So I'll give you two examples. One is a beauty products company out of China. They wanted to set up their shop in the US, right? And this was all about expanding into new markets, right? I mean, going back to how do we basically expand into new markets or build new products and solutions, right? And they didn't have the time of 18 months and 3 years to evaluate what hardware, what software, what ERP, build a data center or look for co-location. So they were very clear in the mind that time to market is very critical for them. And the way to enable time to market is leverage the power of cloud. So they decided that while traditionally they have been working in a model where they will basically evaluate hardware providers, float an RFP, build a data center, they don't want to do that when they are expanding into new market. So they said, we will basically implement everything in the cloud. We will basically go with a very, very digital workplace kind of a model, which is enabled in all three areas, right? I mean, the front office, the back office, and the mid office, as you call, and essentially go with a 100% on cloud kind of an approach. So the way we look at it, or the customers are defining, is where do we basically look at cloud as one of the technology levers, right? So essentially going back to the drawing board and figuring out what is that we need to achieve with cloud. Is it about faster time to market, or is it about building a new product and solution, or fail fast, learn fast, or drive better customer experience? So it's all getting more towards innovation and differentiation and less about cost takeout. So cloud is no longer about cost takeout. It's all about growth and innovation. So that's how we are looking at it, and that's how we have been educating our customers.
Very interesting. And I will sort of take you up on the cloud post-COVID conversation, and also I'm actually deeply personally fascinated with how cloud is impacting the mid office, especially. It's literally as if the mid office is vanishing in literally all our customer conversations. But let's sort of come back to Infosys's approach in cloud. You have an interesting platform called Cobalt.
Yep.
I sort of spoke to your customers before this conversation. I also went through a ton of information on the website. So there's a lot going on. Now, let's start from the basics. How would you sort of define Cobalt, devoid of all the marketing jargon? And think of like me as a CIO, CTO conversation, and you're in a sales pitch. How would you pitch Cobalt?
Sure. So we launched Cobalt on August 12th, 2020, right? Almost 2 years back. And one of the things that we observed was everybody was talking about cloud, at least within Infosys, right? I mean, all the service lines, all the sales guys, all the segments, the enabling groups were talking about cloud. And everybody had their own narrative, their value proposition, their assets, their go-to-market strategies and motions. So we said, why don't we bring all of this together under one brand? And that's where this idea started in a drawing room, and we got together with our service lines and our executives and our marketing team, and we were the first ones to launch a brand for cloud services, and that's what we call Cobalt. So when we defined Cobalt, when we actually launched it, we said Cobalt is not just one platform or one solution or one product, but it's a set of services, solutions, and platforms that come together to enable cloud's journey, the customer's cloud journey, right? So essentially what we said we will have 3 value propositions on Cobalt, right? And this is when we launched it, by the way. So I will talk about the evolution of Cobalt. So first value proposition was make the journey as instrumented as possible, right? Don't reinvent the journey. When customer says, I want to get out of data centers, don't again start by saying that, here is where we need to come and sit and interview your executives and understand what you are doing and all of that, right? So how do we bring instrumentation and assets that can fast track the journey to cloud? So that was the
like
first
frameworks. These assets are like frameworks.
Exactly.
Okay.
And there were also solutions and products that we brought in, like discovery tools and migration tools and those kind of things.
Got it.
So that was the first piece, which was powered by assets, right? So bring instrumentation and automation as much as possible. The second aspect was this was all about creating a community of Cobalt, right? So essentially learn from each other, whether it is academia or partners or Infosys developers or delivery guys or sales guys. How can we create a Cobalt community where we can bring in thought leadership and learn from each other, right? So that was a second value proposition. And the third one, which is extremely, extremely critical even today, is how do we make sure that security is not an afterthought? Right. So we wanted to make sure that security is embedded in the design as we embark on the cloud journey, or as customers embark on the cloud journey. So that's how we started with Cobalt. And we said, this is what is our proposition on Cobalt, right? Fast forward now, what we have done is Cobalt is basically at the underlying side, at the bottom line, we want to deliver business outcomes, right? So we are saying we do not want to start our conversation with AWS or Azure or IBM or Google or Oracle or SaaS players for that matter, but we want to talk to the other houses of the enterprise. What I mean by other houses is there is supply chain, there is finance, there is HR, there is sales. So how do we basically go top down where, we are talking to a chief marketing officer to improve enrollments and then basically bring that. So ultimately we want to deliver business outcomes. So we are more industry focused, we are more industry aligned, and we are more co-creation kind of a model today in Cobalt. So that's essentially Cobalt 2.0.
So very interesting. So in summary, these are assets, which is these sets of frameworks and which also allow, I'm sure, hoping for customizations from a company to company scenario and sort of enabled by a community and enterprise grade security. Is that right?
Absolutely. Totally.
Okay, wonderful. So, and I will catch you up on the points on CMOs and the C-level buyers. But before we do that, you made a very interesting point about, you named a ton of these partners. Now, what I'm assuming is that the partner ecosystem is a very critical part of Cobalt, right? And I've seen some of your motions around the reinvent as well, and you do a fantastic job with that. Now, give us a sense of these when you are looking at creating these assets or co-creation or co-innovation, which are some of these top partners that you have sort of had success with in Cobalt? And more importantly, are you sort of cherry picking certain, let's say, workloads and certain motions with certain partners and going out and partnering and, let's say, sell to motions and build with motions, let's say by the industry or by the workload? Is there sort of focus areas there?
Yeah, so I think a pretty interesting question. So first is most of our customers, right, or almost all of them are multi-cloud today, right? In the sense they do not want to sort of, lock in themselves with just one hyperscaler or one SaaS player, but they are actually multi-cloud. So that's one thing that is very clear in our mind. I mean, we hardly have any customers who are just married to one cloud provider, right? In fact, we have a customer who actually has AWS, Azure, Google, Oracle, and private cloud, right? So those are also
buffet of cloud there.
Yeah, buffet of, right? So even we have those type of customers. So when we work with our partners, there are two ways we do it, right? One is we have created reference architectures for technologies as well as industries, right? So for example, if somebody says that we want to set up, we just want to get out of data center, right? A simplest thing. We want to get out of data center and we want to take all our workloads that are residing on-prem into the cloud. We have a reference architecture which starts from the base network compute storage layer and goes all the way up to how you run applications securely, right? So that's one template that we have, or reference architecture. The second could be cloud native development. Like for example, we are doing cloud native development where clients are saying, forget about my legacy, just rebuild everything from scratch. Use either Kubernetes or containers or OpenShift and those kind of things, right? So there is a reference architecture for that. So at the base layer, what we have done, and the second type of reference architectures are industry reference architectures. So when you go to a CPG customer, we have a reference architecture which talks about what are the different components of a CPG client, different business process, right? Where we talk about merchandising, supply chain, inventory optimization, and those kind of things. So essentially what we have done is these reference architectures, one is they are cloud neutral, which means they can run on any cloud. And second is we closely work with the industry teams of our partners, the hyperscalers, and collaborate with them to identify, for example, call center, contact center. How do we automate the call center, contact center process using AI, ML, and we call it generative AI, right, these days, and bring in our components to that, say with Google, right? Because Google has some capabilities in that area where they're bringing CCAI frameworks and those kind of things. So there are cloud specific architectures also that we have created. So our model has been very simple. Keep it cloud neutral so that we give the choice to the customer to choose the cloud and to get recommendations from us in terms of what cloud they should go with. And second is we jointly go to the market with the hyperscaler and sort of pitch that solution. So that's how we have been doing it with our products and solutions.
It's a very interesting approach. I'm sort of fascinated, but I also have a slight pushback. And if you don't mind, it's not meant to be critique, just an observation.
Of course, of course.
Sort of when you sort of have a cloud neutral architecture, that sort of oversimplifies and sort of makes an assumption that all clouds are built the same. But the fact is that all clouds are not built the same. There are things that an Azure does the best. Let's say if you want to do ADFS and things like that, it is best done on Azure. But let's say if you want to do some great NLP, AI, ML sort of test dev scenarios, then Google's great for that. And of course, IBM's great for something else, et cetera, et cetera. So is this sort of a oversimplification on the architectural level that, you can sort of lift and shift one workload across clouds and no amount of re-effort is required and sort of the performance won't be hurt?
Right. So, see, I think a great question, by the way. And I think, when we started working with the hyperscalers, right, as well as, when I say hyperscalers, I include IBM, Oracle, as well as other players into that. The simplest way to define this was, Google has basically great capabilities on the data side. So let's go with Google Cloud for all data requirements. Microsoft has great enterprise relationships, and they actually have customers who are running using SQL for SAP and all these ERP workloads. So why don't we go with Microsoft? AWS, infrastructure as a service, great capabilities. Why don't we go with that? But we deliberately sort of looked at it, and we found that the capabilities that the hyperscalers bring as you go up the value chain into the PaaS and the layers which are more solution focused, I think there are differentiations that we can bring, and there are a lot of capabilities that we can leverage. So at the base layer, right, I mean, when you just talk about infrastructure as a service, there is no differentiation, if you ask me. I think it's all about where have you done it, how fast can you do it, and how cheap can you do it, right? That's what is the question that comes. But as you go up the value chain, right, I think the capabilities that some of the hyperscalers bring specific to those industry business process or industry use cases is far, far, far more richer compared to what some other guys, some other hyperscalers can bring. So that's why we have deliberately decided that we bucket them based on the business outcome that we want to deliver, rather just looking at an architecture kind of a decision. I don't know if that's a straight answer, but I think...
no, it's a great answer. I mean, it doesn't need to be a straight one at it, but, I think it also sort of depends on how invested a organization is in, let's say, in Microsoft assets or Oracle, for example. We've seen a ton of work happening on the OCI, and it's typically people, who've been invested into the Oracle ecosystem for a long time. Their processes are set, everything is set. So I think also these choices also depend on the overall organizational architecture, but not going too deep into it. It's not going to be just about this. We have to move on.
Of course.
I'm also keen to sort of pick your brains, Anant. What we see typically, and this is not again just with you, but the Oracles and SAPs of the world tend to sort of take the dominant part of the cake in terms of motions and assets. But what's the commitment that you and your team have on, let's say, born in the cloud ISVs, which may not be a Salesforce today, but is probably the Salesforce of tomorrow? One is that. And second of all, a ton of these ISVs are not actually born and headquartered in the US anymore. They're sort of headquartered in Vietnam, they're headquartered in Singapore, somewhere in Europe. So what's the strategy? What's the motion? One, to capitalize on these born in the cloud ISVs, bring them into your fold, make assets on top and sell. And second of all, what's the strategy and go-to-market to tap into these regional level innovations?
Well, absolutely. In fact, one of the things that we early identified as one of the market motions was how Infosys, hyperscaler, and an ISV can come together to sort of go to our customers. I mean, I would not call. I mean, I will take an example, right? So it's a public case study, by the way, which is Kraft Heinz, where Infosys, Microsoft Azure, and Snowflake, we have partnered together to sort of deliver a data solution for them, which has huge impact with respect to the way they do their digital work as well as direct to consumer kind of work, right? So similarly, we have partnerships where we work with MongoDB, and we have several other companies like Databricks, especially on the data side and the AI ML side. So what we have done is, again, going back to our previous discussion, we identify patterns. So I'll give a simple example, right? So if you look at banking, we have identified 4 patterns in banking, right? So one is most of the banks want to modernize their payment systems, which has been a big problem for them. Second is they want to improve the retail banking experience for consumers like you and me. Number 3 is to improve the security posture in terms of how they are actually running the bank and how they are safeguarding consumer data. And last but not the least, identify anomalies in banking transactions, which could be fraudulent, right? It could be money laundering, funding that's happening, which is anomaly, right? And how to flag it off to the chief risk officer of the company or of the bank. So for each of these patterns, right, we have identified an ISV partner or basically a startup or an upstart along with the hyperscaler and Infosys coming together and creating that reference solution or a template which we can take to the market. So I think it's very, very important for us to not just focus on the big ones, but also some of these upcoming ones, which could become a big, big company tomorrow and work with them very closely.
True, very interesting. And what about tapping onto these innovations which are very region specific? I'll give you an example. The amount of work which is happening in fintech here in Asia, or let's say there in Europe, is immense, right? Even from a regulation perspective, Europe is the first one to go, and that's again a reason why tapping into local innovation is critical. What's the Infosys strategy on that, especially for Cobalt?
Oh, it's actually a great question. In fact, we have a group within Infosys called ICETS, which is Infosys Center for Emerging Technology Services. And part of that ICETS team, there is something called Infosys Innovation Network, right? So what we have done is globally, we have set up these living labs. We call them Infosys Living Labs. And what we essentially do is to bring innovation partner who can actually co-create solutions for our customers. So in fact, customers have access to these living labs globally, and they can basically come and try out a solution where they can figure out a way to learn fast, fail fast, those kind of things, right? So innovation is very critical. We have onboarded 128 startups from Silicon Valley, from Israel, from India, from many parts of the world. Wonderful. And they play a big role in how Cobalt creates solutions, next generation solutions as they call it.
Wonderful. Great answer. Thank you. I'm sorry I'm pressing your buttons a little bit here.
No problem.
Now, you've sort of mentioned assets time and again. Now, one of my observations with assets has been that while the reference architectures are made, there's not necessarily enough tooling that's done to sort of for auto learning of these architectures, because these architectures are being implemented across client situations, and ultimately they're pretty worthless until they learn from these client situations, right? So can you talk to me about how are you ensuring, or is there a mechanism that you put in place? There's these frameworks and assets that are updated as you go and as you learn, client situation by client situation.
Oh, yeah. So in fact, what we have done is we have created something called a Cobalt store, right? This is an internal sort of, facing store where we have consolidated all our assets. And we have categorized them into 4 types of assets. We call them business assets, engineering assets, learning assets, and knowledge assets, right? So what we have done is from the external, from the service store that we created, which has close to around 400 assets, we sort of converged a little more from that and created around 70 assets, which are now external facing, right? So where customers or partners can actually, it's like a marketplace, right? You go to an Azure or an AWS or a Google marketplace and you can download a solution and implement it. So something similar we have done where it's an external marketplace. And essentially one of the big objectives for both the service store and the external marketplace is to evolve those solutions based on how we learn. Some of them are self-learning based on how we can basically configure them and customize them for our customers. And some of them we actually put our learnings through releases and stuff like that. So that's how we have been doing it.
But let me put you on the spot, Anant. I've been studying marketplaces for the for the better half of the decade. And what I've observed consistently is that marketplaces tend to collapse very quickly, simply on the account of the fact that the expectation is that customers will directly go and buy off the marketplace and then sort of go from there. But that seldom happens because they need assisted purchase that essentially works for them in their scenario. That sort of, if somebody's on the other end of the phone and saying you go to this place, you download like this, you implement, etc., etc. So truly assisted in that fashion. Also, what happens typically is marketplace sales are considered as SaaS sales. That also sort of disrupts the sales model, especially for a company like Infosys. Now, do you think there is enough level of preparedness internally at Infosys to manage the change that comes on the back of launching a marketplace?
Yeah, so most of our solutions, I mean, I think there is also a component of IP involved here, right? I think we are very careful in terms of what products and what solutions go on the hyperscaler marketplace as well as our own marketplace, right? But as you rightly said, and I think it's a brilliant point that you brought up. It's not about just downloading and implementing, right? I mean, it has to be an assisted implementation, because most of our customers do not want it to be like, while we want to be out of box vanilla implementation, but there is always a level of configuration, as we call it. We don't use the word customization, but we have started using the word configuration these days. And there is a level of configuration, and we make sure that, that's how they do it. So our marketplace solutions are not just download and implement, but also they are assisted one. And most of them are assisted one, actually.
Okay, interesting. I'll not push you a little bit more on the sales model, because I'm not sure you want to discuss this on this conversation. But I'm really keen to speak to you also about another topic. I was on a call with one of your large clients just yesterday, and he mentioned a very interesting thing. I'm going to read it out because I won't remember the name. It's called the Infosys Zero Disruption Modernization Approach. Now, he was particularly impressed with the fact that they were migrating their legacy applications onto Cobalt, and this was used, and it's helped him sort of iron out the minor issues. Can you sort of enlighten us? What's this approach?
Yeah, so what we did, right? I mean, as part of our legacy modernization approach, we came out with this 7-layer model, right? We call it as a zero disruption model. And the reason why it was zero disruption is because we don't want to do this lock, stock, barrel, basically modernize everything and create a risk in the way business is being done today, and create that change that people usually, or customers usually, do not want to sort of go through. So that's why what we said is we'll do incremental changes, starting from the base layer, where we talk about how do we basically look at making an impact from a experience standpoint, and then eventually getting into redefining and redesigning the business process itself. So I think, essentially we wanted to make a difference by creating smaller impact and smaller value, and then basically build on that to sort of, evolve it as a digitally run cloud native kind of a enterprise, right? So that is the zero disruption model. So in fact, we do not want to disrupt the way things are being done today and bring in huge amount of change, and as a result of that, bad customer experience and impact on the way things are being done, but do it in an incremental fashion. That's why we call it as a zero disruption model. It has been fairly successful, right? And so example being, right, one of the insurers that we are working with, they want to eventually get sort of out of the mainframe, but they don't want to do it in like, I will retire you on mainframe in 12 months or 18 months. So how do we do it for someone like them who are saying, I want to eventually get out of mainframe? Just like the way my boss told me in 1995 that, mainframes are going to die, and we still have mainframes.
We hear it every 5 years, it never dies, really, does it?
Exactly. So it did slowly, right? So that was the whole intent behind the zero disruption modernization.
Very interesting. Now, you mentioned a few interesting points, which sort of is bringing a new thought in my head, which is there's an immense amount of change in how DevOps is being looked at within large organizations. There's an entire lean approach is coming in a very big way. Now, somebody as heavy and large as Infosys, how is your DevOps approach changing accordingly to how clients are changing to support their lean approaches to DevOps?
So I think I think I would say most of our customers are sort of embarking on agile models and DevOps models. Right. In fact, there are certain customers today with whom we are talking, and when we talk about cloud, one of the big discussions when they are talking about cloud is also the operating model and how the operating model will move from a sort of level 1, level 2, level 3 kind of a model to a pod based model, which is more based on agile and product kind of a mindset, right? In fact, even one of the trends that we are seeing in the market today is when these large RFPs and RFQs are coming out, the evolution of the operating model, we call it at Infosys, we call it CMO plus and FMO. CMO is current mode of operations. CMO plus is how we incrementally make that change, and FMO is the future mode of operations. So the future mode, we used to call DevOps and Sec DevOps or DevSecOps as FMO, but now it has become CMO plus. So clients are saying that within 6 to 12 months, we want you to start implementing the fundamentals of DevSecOps and Sec DevOps. I mean, it's interchangeable, by the way. That's why I'm using that word. And go to a product mindset and move towards a sort of pod mindset, right? So absolutely, I think that's a big way. And internally, even within Infosys, we call ourselves as a live enterprise company, where we also want to move towards that model, and we have been doing that for the last 4 years now.
Very interesting. And that sort of leads me naturally to my next question, which is about open source. I love open source. Look, I think it's come a long way. But there's so much more to do in open source. So what I want to talk to you about, and is that your commitment of the cloud business to open source. Let's say if you can give me a number of these 35,000 assets, what percentage today, let's say, based on open source, and more importantly, is there like a special practice or a way in which you're handholding clients around open source? Because while there's a ton of excitement, there's also a ton of pitfalls, right? How are you sort of managing that dichotomy, if you may, about open source?
Sure. So I think, again, I will be very, very measured. I will give a politically correct answer when it comes to open source. So we have a practice, or we have an offering called FOSS, FOSS, which is called Free and Open Source Software COE, right? One of the things that we have seen is the biggest success for us when it comes to open source has been creating platforms that can be used to deliver certain services. So, for example, if I bring free and open source software to create an cloud orchestration platform, which actually manages multiple clouds, which does metering, billing, provisioning, orchestration of clouds, monitoring of clouds, customers don't have any issues, right? In the sense they are okay, because it's not while it is important from a managed services and production standpoint, but if something happens, things will not hit the roof, right? I mean, that's essentially how they see it, and that's what has been my experience. But when you start bringing open source for production critical applications or databases, that's when I think there is a lot of scrutiny. Specifically coming from the CISO organization, because I think there is still, the verdict is still out in terms of what's the impact of using open source. So there is a lot of scrutiny, there is a lot of evaluation, there's a lot of POCs and pilots that happen when you actually bring in open source. So our experience has been that open source is fairly successful on the engineering assets piece of it. Like, for example, I create a DevOps platform which can run on open source. Customers will not have any problem. I create an automation platform that runs on open source, no problem. I create a solution which actually migrates workloads or provisions workloads using Terraform and those kind of things, no problem. But when it comes into production, there is a scrutiny. There are still customers who are open, but I think I would say the verdict is still out.
Very interesting. And do you think that's not changing after IBM invested a truckload of money in Red Hat, and Red Hat has been very successful, especially if you see how OpenShift is being embedded across hyperscalers, and these assets are being IBM-ready assets are being bought in to these hyperscalers. Do you not see a change, the client end, of accepting the more enterprise-grade OpenShift sort of platforms?
Oh yeah, in fact, I would again. I mean, this is me, by the way, not Anand. I mean, not Infosys, but Anand speaking. But I see. I think when it comes to Red Hat, right? I think the amount of investment and the support and the way it is being delivered and deployed, I would say it is no longer just an open source, right? Because there are. I mean, if you have today templates where you can implement a Red Hat for a customer who is regulated in FIPS and FISMA, right? Or, HIPAA kind of thing, right? So there is a lot of support and there is a lot of architecture support that comes from the R&D group of Red Hat. So I would say, I mean, absolutely. I think Red Hat is very, very successful. But I would say that Red Hat is much more than open source today, right? Because the amount of R&D effort and the amount of support that is going in the back end to support customers who are using Red Hat is far, far more compared to what I see with some of the other open source.
Very interesting. And this conversation will be incomplete if we don't talk about the intersection of cloud with 5G and IoT. Even from our company perspective, we see a ton of inquiries coming in onto the intersection of 5G, IoT being delivered on the back of a cloud. Give me some examples. What is the readiness of Cobalt today to support some of these implementations, especially around things like 5G, IoT, and digital twin, which is far more real compared to more theoretical concepts like metaverse, which are far from being achieved in reality today, right? So what's the readiness on that side?
Yeah, so I think, in fact, last reInvent, AWS reInvent, when we were there, and AWS launched their private 5G solution, or one of the announcements that they made, everybody got very excited, and there was a lot of confusion with the telcos in terms of what will happen to them. But again, going back to the way I look at whether IoT or 5G or metaverse is the most important aspect, or the most important thing that customers ask is the use cases, right? For example, where are these use cases that you can bring from a 5G or an IoT standpoint, which can actually, so we at Infosys call it as the nexus of forces, right? So there are 6 technologies, 5G, edge, IoT, AI, data, and cloud, that will come together to deliver a business outcome. And that's the nexus of forces. So essentially, even when it comes to metaverse, one of our approach has always been, and this is how Infosys sort of, incubates any new offering or embarks on any new service, is to create use cases around that, or, look at use cases. So for example, if you look at 5G, one of the things that we have done for an automotive company is how can we basically automate their assembly lines where cars are being manufactured, right? So rather than having one assembly line for one make, one model, how can a same assembly line be used for multiple makes and multiple models? And 5G and IoT can help just-in-time assembly of those cars, right? So these are the use cases. Similarly, for a mining company, where the trucks actually go into the mine, we can actually predict. This is basically more around predictive and proactive troubleshooting to see if there is going to be a problem with one of the trucks as it goes into the mine. So that we can take proactive actions and it doesn't halt the other trucks which are behind them, right? So these are some of the use cases. So I would say when it comes to 5G, IoT, metaverse, or any of these new technologies, having use cases and defining use cases by industry is very critical. And that's essentially what Cobalt has been doing along with each of these technologies.
Very well said. Very well said. And, when you talk about going these, let's say, creating use cases, etc., talk to me about the readiness of Cobalt to deal with new age industries. And I'll tell you where I come from. A lot of these new age industries, especially in fintech, while they do need partners of choice, they aren't necessarily very open or rather positive about traditional players, which are like let's say you or IBM and the others, which don't necessarily come across sometime as the latest in terms of technologies, right? So how are you building relatability to these new age industries, which, by the way, are far more engineering mindset led in terms of technology, which means that they probably have an army of developers internally who prefer to just download an instance and go from there. So how are you sort of building those inroads and relatability to these new age verticals?
Oh, in fact, this is a great question. See, one of the things that we did as part of our Infosys Center for Emerging Technologies is to identify such partners for emerging industries, as we call, right? So if you look at one of the things that we have done, especially in financial services, is we created a cloud called fs.live.cloud, right? So essentially, in case if there is a customer who comes and says that they want us to design a solution for fraud detection, right, or anomalies in banking transactions. I'm just giving an example, though it is not related to fintech, but it's an example. So we actually have a partner with whom we work, and we have created that white labeled solution which runs on our cloud, which is fs.live.cloud, and actually delivers the solution. So I would say when it comes to new age industries, we have been working very closely with our Infosys Innovation Network and our iSets team to identify these patterns and bring in the right partners who can help us with that. So I think that's essentially what we are doing. So one more example which I want to talk about is the just walkout solution from AWS, right? So this is specifically with respect to the way they have built their retail stores, right? So we have now a lot of these oil and gas companies who want to convert their gas stations into EV charging stations. And as customers who have electric cars are charging their cars, in those 20 to 40 minutes, do you want to shop around, or do you want to buy groceries, or do you want to eat something? So they're actually also setting up retail quick service restaurant and retail stores at these EV charging stations. So we are working very closely with AWS on a template where the new age companies who want to get into adjacent businesses can actually use the JWO solution, right? I mean, just walkout solution. So I think those are some of the things that we're doing, but that's very, very closely in collaboration with iSets and IIN team of ours.
Yeah, makes sense. Great example, by the way. Thanks for sharing that. You've spoken about CMOs and other technology decision makers as well. Since we're speaking of building relatabilities, I'd love to pick your brains as to the internal change within Infosys that you've had to sort of travel to be able to now cater to these new breed of decision makers, which necessarily did not relate to Infosys, right? So how are you buying their time? How are you sort of buying a seat in front of them and establishing a credible conversation at that?
Oh yeah, I think first change that we did was that, I mean, as engineers, right, most of us are comfortable selling to technology organizations, right? Yeah. So naturally, we are very comfortable talking to the CTO, the CIO, this head of apps, head of infra, because that's the language that we are born and brought up in, right? So essentially, one big change that we had to do was to sort of, go. So we call it below the cloud and above the cloud, right? Okay. So above the cloud is all these other stakeholders that do not necessarily want to talk technology. So I'll give an example, right? So one of the CPG customer, we were talking to the chief HR officer, and she said that my problem is employee experience. So she said, I have contract work at this company. I have employees who work at this company. And every time they want to look at their 401k, they have to go to a system, use their user ID password. They want to look at their leave information. They want to look at their stocks. They want to look at how much is their compensation. They have different systems, and they have to log in passwords. They forget the passwords, and they come and scream that, this sucks and all of that, right? So how can you solve that problem? There was no discussion about technology, right? It was all about my net promoter score with respect to employees is way bottom. How do I get it to the level which is acceptable to my management? So that's where our understanding of how these underlying systems work and what is that we need to do to solve that particular problem is something that we used. And while we brought in technology players like ServiceNow to sort of, because when it comes to employee experience and creating those workflows that work with each other without disrupting the underlying system of records, I think ServiceNow plays a big role. So I think, we brought in ServiceNow, and we now have one experience portal for all the employees where they can go at a click of a button, they can get whatever they want, right? So that actually improved. And now this conversation is very difficult for some of our traditional sales guys to have, right? So that's the pivot that we did 2-3 years back. And that's working very well. So we are now going both above the technology office or beyond IT, as we call, and also catering to IT. So I think that's essentially what we have done.
I have to appreciate two things in this answer. One is the fact that how you explained the example really well. And second of all, I think I loved your honesty and your candor that some of the sales guys were not able to have this conversation. But I'll pick you up on that a little bit from now. You spoke about COVID as well. And that's something, we all know what COVID did in terms of the front office, the entire digital commerce, customer experience. Look, that's not a surprise anymore. I think what I really want to pick your brains on is that one of the outcomes of COVID has been the very difficult times in supply chain. There's a ton of advisory that even we are doing around how to modernize the supply chain, how to let's say, use digital twins to be able to improve efficiencies. How do we better capture data and better use data to devise better supply chain strategies? Now, from an Infosys perspective and from a Cobalt perspective, please give me a sense of how are you helping clients improve supply chain post-COVID? Are there certain client names can you give, or let's say examples can you give, to make this more real for us?
Yeah, so I think this is a great one of the early projects that we did was in this particular space. So there is this customer, a CPG client of ours. Unfortunately, I can't name because we have NDAs. And they actually wanted to look at how they can optimize inventory as well as supply chain, right? So they basically work with a lot of retailers: Walmart, Target, Walgreens, CVS, and many, many more. And one of the big issues that they had was to figure out what inventory sells in which store, in which zip code, in which city and which state, right? And the data was all over the place. So we actually, along with our data and analytics team, collaborated with Microsoft to create a solution which actually does three things. So one is it actually collects data from all the stores in terms of what inventory is being used at different times of the year, right? In the sense, there could be certain products that could get utilized during Thanksgiving. There could be certain products that could get utilized during a football game. There could be certain products that will get involved, used during Christmas. So we actually got all of this data. And the data that we showed to the inventory head and the supply chain head was glaring, right? So there is inventory sitting in store, which is not getting utilized, but there is inventory not available in a store where that inventory is required. So using this data and providing them insights and observations, we were able to show them how you can optimize the supply chain based on demographics of your customers and the sale that is happening. So I think this was a phenomenal case study. Because this was catering directly to the business. It was not about technology, it was not about IT, but it was catering to the business to give them visibility on how they can optimize inventory and supply chain. So I would say that's what we have been replicating, and that's what we have been doing with many more customers in that retail CPG space.
It's amusing. One would assume CPG companies would be very well invested in visibility platforms at least, but here we are in 2022 and we're still talking bare metal visibility, right, for them. So nonetheless, you spoke about, I appreciated your candor about the need for reskilling. Now, one of the longest standing critiques for companies like Infosys has been the slow moving nature or the sluggish nature of how, let's say, skills are onboarded and how, let's say, they're changing internally to reflect upon client situations. Talk to me about, let's say, at one end, you've got these sweeping changes of new buyers, new verticals, new technologies. At the other end, you've got salespeople who are used to mega deals. They're not used to SaaS per se. They're not used to 6-7% margin payouts. The structuring of margins was very different back in time. How are you making that journey from point A to point B in terms of internal skilling to be able to truly be ready for new age deal making?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the interesting things that we observed during COVID and post-COVID also, right, is most of the employees, right? I think whether it is employees or anybody is asking what's the purpose of what we do, right? So Infosys actually came out. We announced our purpose recently. When I say recently, a few quarters back, when we said, we want, our purpose is now to amplify human potential to sort of, make an impact on communities, people, and employees, right? I think so sort of, that's our purpose statement. So if you look at what one of the things that is happening with respect to what we do, one of the things that we did was we have this ESG vision that will actually train 10 million people in digital skills by 2025, right? And we actually said that we will give the tools, we'll give the technology, we'll empower the educators to do that. And we felt that our employees will be very happy to know that they are working in a company that is actually doing this. But we were wrong. We actually figured out that they just don't want to be part of the company who is doing it, but they want to be the ones to do this, right? And essentially, that is where they started going to their communities and their sort of cities and places where they came from. And then we decided we want to do three things, and that's what we have been practicing. So it was all about how do we create opportunities in the community and how we create upward mobility, right? So when it comes to, and I'll come to the skilling part of it, one of the things that we did was when we recruit from the market, first and foremost we did was to start going to community colleges, right? And this is one of the most underrepresented university system that we see, right? I mean, education system in the country. So because, most of us are very excited about 4-year STEM and, sort of, going after all these tier 1, tier 2 Ivy League colleges. But, the talent that comes from community colleges and the hunger and the intensity is phenomenal, right? So I think that's the first thing. So we now have relationships with all these community colleges, many community colleges in many parts of the world where we actually get the talent from. Number two, we started looking at talent beyond STEM, right? Hire, for example, we hired some Amazon truck drivers and, people from hospitality industry and, trained them and, they are now working as data operators and security operators, right? With the right amount of skilling and certification and reskilling and all of that. And the third one was to sort of, create this structure where teachers, we actually train the teachers in computer science so they can actually go to their communities and do that. So the big part of our reskilling and our retraining and certification is this platform that we have created called Lex. It's actually our learning platform, which has 3 types of contents, right? So one is the Infosys created content, which actually is something that we actually create and we put them on the platform. Second is third-party content from Udacities and Coursera's of the world. And the third one is the partner content, right? I mean, we have a lot of these hyperscalers and technology companies and players in the security and data space who actually give their content. So our model has been to move from horizon 1 to, the McKinsey model of 1 to 2 to 3. So we bucket our people into these 3 buckets and see how we can move them from a traditional Windows administrator to an Azure administrator to someone who can do work in the IoT and edge space, right? So there is a constant reskilling and retraining, and we call them digital skills. So when they acquire digital skills and when they get trained and certified, there is also a direct there is a correlation to the compensation plan as well, because obviously it improves the revenue productivity. They bring better productivity with a value standpoint. So it actually helps them. So I think reskilling, retraining, recertification has been a huge part of that. Even I go through that, right? In fact, I actually go through certification and training, and I have to understand AWS, Azure, Google, and millions of announcements that they make. Obviously we can't keep in touch with all of them, but at least we have to be aware of that, right? So I think slightly unrelated answer, but I think, I just wanted to cover everything, including our purpose.
I think you said community about a dozen times, but and that sort of goes to sort of show your commitment to the communities. But, this conversation is happening at a very interesting time when one of your competition has just been sued for hiring too many Indians. Now, here in the US, again, it's such a sensitive topic, right? And how, let's say, in your team, do you sort of as a practice, as a matter of culture, ensure you hire for skill, you hire for capability, and not for nationality?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I was just talking about it yesterday. Most of the tech companies in the Silicon Valley have now removed the 4-year college degree, right,
Yeah.
as a mandatory requirement. While they still talk about it, but it's we early on said that we want to move towards a model where we hire for skills and not for degrees, right? While it will, I mean, I'm not saying education system is flawed and we should not hire, nobody should go to college anymore, but hiring for skills is very, very important. So especially when it comes to diversity and inclusivity, right? I think we are doing 2-3 things, right? I mean, one, I'm sure you'll be able to relate to this and you have heard about it. I think gender diversity is very, very important for tech companies like ours, right? So we have done 2 things, especially when it comes to women employees. So one is we have this program called restart with Infosys, which is there are a lot of these women colleagues of ours who actually take a break, either because they get into some commitments and they have to take care of their kids, or they become caretakers for somebody. And there is a big gap, and they want to restart, right? Because now they are free and they can basically commit time. So that's one program that we are running very, very judiciously. And second is a lot of our women employees, they actually take a break after maternity, and they just don't come back. So we also have a program for that. So while 38.5% of our population is women employees today, as we go up the value chain, there is still a lot of work that needs to be done. So hiring for leadership, gender diversity for leadership also is something that we actually are focusing a lot on. Number 2, right, I think as you rightly said, with respect to skills, we are hiring from non-STEM backgrounds, as I call it, right? So liberal arts, sociology, anthropology, hospitality, design. So I think these are skills, when you get them into the team, the amount of differentiation and the diversity in thinking that they bring is much, much rich compared to just having technologists who are discussing and sitting in the room and discussing, right? So that's the second thing that we're doing. But I think our focus on diversity inclusivity is huge. In fact, I'm the champion for diversity and inclusivity for the cloud infrastructure and cybersecurity, where a lot of women do not want to work because it's 24/7. It is production. It is high pressure. Those kind of things. But we are changing that. In fact, we are making a lot of investments. We are getting more and more women, and they are pretty excited to work now in the world of cloud. I think it's the place to be.
Yeah, it's a great answer, because I think I'm a big champion of this as well, and I'll tell you where I come from is I strongly believe when, let's say, algorithms are made, there are inept biases within an algorithm as well, and it's only, let's say, when only men do the algorithms, a certain bias creeps in, if you like it or not, and having a different point of view on the same algorithm. Because fact is, let's say an algorithm would say women only like pink, but that's far from the truth, right? Women also like gray and blue and other colors, right? So it's a great point. Thank you for that. Now, I know we've sort of crossed our time by a large margin, but this conversation will be incomplete if we don't talk about sustainability. Today, it is the front and center of what the conversation is with every client. Now, how well prepared are you to talk ESG outcomes and to make them more tangible and not theoretical in nature?
Yeah, so I think I'll split the answer. In fact, recently this question was also asked in Adam's keynote, right? Adam, the CEO of AWS.
Yeah.
And he said the fastest way for anybody to be sustainable is to move to cloud, right? I think that's the simplest. I mean, it's easier said than done. And that's the simplest answer that anybody can give. But at the same time, there is also a reason, especially in Europe, if you see the prices are going up so much when it comes to energy prices, and a lot of customers are now looking at alternate ways to run their business and to consume workloads and those kind of things. In fact, one of the recent wins that we had with a large automotive company, one of the asks from the customer was to create these private clouds which actually use green energy, right? In the sense, they were very clear that we want you to prove it to us that, the energy that is powering these co-location data centers are using alternate energy mechanisms and not the traditional energy mechanisms, right? But at the same time, I think, one challenge that I see personally, and I've been asking these questions to a lot of people, and maybe people ask you also this question, is how do we measure that, we are actually being carbon neutral is a big question today. I think, not many customers, I mean, like, for example, we have an oil and gas company who had this goal that, they want to get out of data centers and move everything to cloud because they had this carbon neutral goals, right? But if you go and sort of, look at how do you measure that? Like, what were you pre-movement to cloud and what are you today? It's like a big question mark. So I would say measuring the effectiveness of that is still a question mark. We are still trying to figure it out. There are ways and means to do it in a small way, but in a big way, at least that's me, by the way, not Infosys, but I would want to be very candid there.
No, I again appreciate your candor, because I'm on the fence as well. I think it's more smaller tangibles that are more likely in the near future than large enterprise grade, enterprise level sort of outcomes. So thank you for that candor. Appreciate that.
Yeah, sure.
In the closure, talk to me about 2023. Where does Cobalt go from here? And is any mergers, or not mergers is the wrong word for Infosys, but any acquisitions on the anvil to beef up the capability for Cobalt?
Oh yeah, I think inorganic growth is something that I think our philosophy when it comes to acquisitions has been like, it has to be the right fit, right? In the sense, we do not want sort of, I would not say we do not want, but we want someone who can basically bring in the value that actually creates a differentiation for us in the market, right? So if you look at all the acquisitions that we have done, whether it is Simplus or Guide Vision or Brilliant Basics or WongDoody, they have created a huge differentiation for us in the market in an area where we wanted to basically place our bets, right? So I think that is our philosophy, and that will continue to be our philosophy even when it comes to cloud, right? So we do not want to acquire a cloud company because they are good in migrating workloads, right? Because that used to be one of the things once upon a time. So that's one thing, right? Which is all about the right fit. So absolutely, we will be always looking for a right fit, and we'll actually look at those opportunities. But when it comes to what's next for Cobalt, right? I would say three things. I think one is the technology-led offerings will continue to be there in the market, because a lot of our customer base is Global 2000s who have less standardization, technology debt, who are still evolving, acquiring companies, and they have to integrate. So I think that will continue to be the big focus. The second big focus for us is making sure that we align our cloud offerings to the industries. So industry cloud, industry templates, industry blueprints, I think that's going to be the second big thing. The third one is, of course, I think it's not just about what is today and what was yesterday, but also co-creating which will be in the future, whether it is metaverse or more use cases on 5G or IoT and those kind of things. But ultimately, we want to make sure that anything and everything that we do in the world of cloud, it has to deliver business outcomes.
Right.
So our Cobalt 2.0 mantra is going to be deliver business outcomes, and also have contracts which are written in that fashion, not just say business outcomes. But we do have customers today where our contracts are written in a way we get paid when we deliver outcomes, but we want to make it more and more mainstream. So that's what is future for Cobalt.
Wonderfully said, and it's been a marathon of an interview. Thank you so much. It's been about 75 minutes of high energy passion, and I can your passion for Cobalt is very palpable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I wish you the very best, and
thank you.
And dear viewers, thank you so much for taking the time to hear this interview with Anant. If you have any hard questions for Anant, do pass them on, and I'll ensure I'll ping him and give those questions to him. But thanks once again for watching this episode, and I hope you found value. Anant, thank you once again.
Thank you, Sanchit. Thank you for the time.